Hello and welcome to a video with me, Raindell. Today I'm going to be touching a topic that I get a lot of questions about, and that's team building and how do I think my teams when before I bring them into battle. So let's do that. And the first thing that I want to say is I am probably one of the guys that spend the most time on WOTV. If you're not familiar with that website, they have data mining about all units, all vision cards, the stats, the abilities, how it works. It's pretty impressive. So you can go into just about any characters, see their total stats, their resistances, and then their abilities, their modifiers, their chances of working. So what I do before building any team is I learn the characters' abilities, their range, what they do. I learn the game mechanics, which is the actual formula behind status effects, for example. So that game knowledge plays a huge role into being able to understand how teams are going to interact between each other, and then what you can leverage to win. And I also spend just as much time looking at the characters that I want to fight than I do looking at the characters that I want to use, because you can also discern characters' weaknesses by studying them. So that was my little research part. Now, back to the War Division. So my process when I build a team follows the steps that we see on screen right now. So the first thing is I want to know what I'm going to fight. I don't believe that War Division is a game where you can just build a team that will be the ultimate response against anything. You can use your stronger characters, put them together, and have a good early turn set so that you're good against most matchups. But the true team building, I think, is when you know what you're going to fight and you build a team that is specifically designed to take them out. It's what I do with the MR videos that I do, but it's also very important for PvE. You need to know what the boss is going to be using in terms of damage type and how to resist it, or how to leverage the enemy's weaknesses as well. So both for any kind of content, really, studying your enemy and knowing what you're going to fight is a very important first step. And once you've gone through that and you know, for example, Yuna, I know that she only uses magic attacks, that's all she has in her kit, and then Sakura as well. So for all those teams that are leveraging those two characters, if I have one person that's immune to magic, well, 2 out of 3 of the enemy characters can't hit that character from my side, so that's a huge advantage. So yeah, know your enemy. And then, once you know that, how do you survive against them? So I just named the magic resistance example against Yuna, but in my opinion, there are 5 ways to build a team and have survivability. The most common way is using a hate tank, so somebody who's going to use a hate up ability and then will walk forward and take hits for you. And you want your tank to be able to receive the damage types that your enemy deals correctly. So Rain will be strong against magical attacks, for example, while Warrior of Light can tank just about anything, but he's still stronger against physical than he is against magic. For Whisper, she can be immune to just about any damage type, but again, you need to plan and use her accordingly. And then hate tanks have the disadvantage that they need to generate hate before they are efficient, and also that if they get dispelled, they lose their hate, and that means that they don't tank well. So these are things to take into account when using those kind of guys. So other types are using bruisers, so characters that are generally tanky enough to survive a couple turns, and that are going to win by out-damaging the enemy team and killing them before they go down. You can use sustain, healers. Yuna is a prime example of a healer. You can build a team against for evasion, but that one's a little bit different. When you're using a hate tank or a healer, you don't need to center your entire team around that. But for evasion, if that's the way you're going to survive, your entire team has to revolve around evasion, because you need support from every single possible vision card and a piece of equipment that's going to help getting your evasion up. So it's a very specific type of team. And then another way to survive is just to kill the enemy before they get to hit you. So that's what I put under first right here. But if your team has long range, high damage attacks and can take out the enemy team before they hit your guys, well, you're good. You don't need a tank. You don't need healing. That's what the missile teams were generally, where you have Frederica, Nivlu, you just quicken Frederica back to back and take out the entire enemy team before they make contact. Sakura's another good unit for that. Her limit break has such a huge range and huge damage that she can kill people before encountering them. So yeah, you know who you're going to fight, and then you know how you're going to survive against them. Well, the next step is find out the damage type you're going to use, and then the synergy. And in War of the Vision, I think there's two ways to think about synergy. The first one is units that share an element. So units with the same element will have, for the more recent units at least, master abilities that increase the HP and damage from all of your characters with that element. And then also their attacks of said elements are going to chain together. For example, in my light units that I put on screen, I have 3 true light units, but I also have Kilfei. So you can also take into account that some characters can use elements that are not within their damage type. So far we have a lot of units that can deal light damage, even though they're not light units, and only one unit that can hit outside their element aside from that, which is Sakura, with her ability to do lightning attacks. And I think it's important, in most teams that I build, I try to have at least 2 characters of either the same element or the same damage type, so that I can use vision cards that have party ability that can benefit for several members. I don't like using, for example, Ifrit, which will give attack up if I have only one physical attacker in my team, because I feel like most of my party ability is wasted. So for those light teams, for example, I would use Bahamut if I'm using 2 mages, or if I'm using 2 light characters. Well, yeah, it has to be light in the case of Bahamut. But I would use, say, Ramu if I'm using 2 mages, and I would be very happy with that. But if I'm using only one, not my favorite choice. But back to synergy. So you can use units that share an element, or you can use units that share a damage type. And again, what you're gaining out of this generally will be buffs that increase offense of all your party. Gunners are a good example of that, where they can increase missile attack of people around them and also range. But that's also true for slash attackers using, for example, Dwayne or El Cirel, or even Pugilist with strike attacks. So there are a lot of characters that can increase their own damage types in an AoE with other characters, so that means they have good synergy. And again, units with a shared damage type can chain together, and even better if you can have both. So some combinations, like Yuna and Sakura, are light and magic. Now, magic is a unique damage type that does not build chain by itself, you only get the elemental chain. But if you're using Frederica and Nivlu and both use lightning missile attacks, well then you're building a lightning and a missile chain, and both stack together. Dark slash units are units that chain very well together as well. So yeah, you pick one, whichever, an element that you share and a damage type that you share. And generally what I like doing is having at least 2 units that will share this, and these units will use vision cards that reinforce their damage type. So if I was using, for example, Glaciella and Victora, I would be very happy putting Titan on Glaciella so that she gets her extra attack, and then both units benefit from the Mankiller. But then I could put the running through snowy fields on Victora so that she has Pierce attack. So both those vision cards benefit the 2 Pierce attackers that I'm using. And I think that's an important way to build damage. And then whichever method I use to survive, say I'm using a hate tank, well, he'll go in front and use a different vision card that might support him, or that might support my 2 other guys, depending on what I need. So now that you know how you're surviving, and then how you're going to take out the enemy team, well, you need to set up your early turns. And my process when setting up early turns is as follows. First, what are the buffs that are necessary for my survival? Do I absolutely need my damage dealer to use bells? Do I absolutely need my frontline to use resist magic because I'm going against Yuna, for example? So you need to know which buffs you absolutely need your team to use. And then you're going to turn off and on abilities until that's the first thing that's being used, so that you're sure that you actually get that buff. Then when that is done, it's all about the positioning your team takes. And generally, units will use AoE buffs in priority over anything else, and that will, more often than not, keep them back for the first couple turns in combat. So for your frontline units, the ones that you want in front, and the ones that are going to take the first attacks from the enemy team, well, generally, you want to disable all those AoE buffs so that what they do in the first turn is run forward, and then they're far away from your other guys and they're going to take a hit that's not an AoE hit. Your backline characters, they need to have AoE buffs so that they can stay behind in that first turn. And some characters do not have access to AoE buffs. In that case, there are a ton of TMRs that give access to some form of AoE buffs, so you can use that to trick their AI into staying back. An example of that everybody has is Mon's TMR, which has 2 activations of an AoE buff. But also Medina's, Cecil's, Miranda's, you name it, there are a ton, so try to pick a TMR that has an ability that's useful for you. But also just the fact that you can control units to stay back is very important. And when I say backline, it's not necessarily a character that attacks from a long range. It can be a character with a short range, but one that you want to have join combat later so that he doesn't take the attacks that the enemy team deals in the first turns. Often, enemy mages and enemies with high AP will just use their stronger abilities right at the beginning, and when that initial onslaught is done, your other guys can close in and be much safer. So yeah, that's it for the early turns. So let's speak of an example, which is the MR team that I'm trying to build to fight Yuna. So in this team, I'm using Marial as a frontline unit. She is built to have maxed out magic resistance so that Sakura and Yuna cannot deal damage to her. So for this reason, magic resist is a must for my team. That means I'm going to be using Fenrir. Fenrir is not an offensive vision card. I would love to use an offensive vision card to make sure my guys hit harder, but it is a must, so it's going to be in there. And then I need to make sure that on her first turn, Marial can actually use magic resist. But then, this is not good because I'm giving an AoE buff to my frontline, and this AoE buff will mean that she's staying behind. So to make sure that Marial actually gets to the front and begins tanking properly, in this team I'm using Quicken, which means that Marial gets a second turn early on and then begins moving forward now that her only AoE buff has been cast. And then my backline, well, I'm using Elshra, and against Yuna, I absolutely need my damage dealers to be able to two-shot Yuna. The reason for that is Yuna's counter ability. If I can two-shot her, I only have a 30% chance that she actually procs her healing counter. So it's not the end of the world, because the second hit kills her, so she cannot counter. If it took me 3 hits to kill her, then that's a huge deal, because she has 2 times 30% chance to get back to full life, and then I can't deal with that. So I gave damage supporting vision cards. Now, in my team, I'm using Ramu and Solidus. That is because I don't own the Signs of Shadow card or Bahamut to give my team even more damage. If I did, they would be better choices, but we do with what we have. And then, in this team, I am also running Shadowlynx, who's a character that doesn't have AoE buffs. And guess what? If my Shadowlynx ran forward in her first turn because she's getting ready to attack, what will happen is she'll just get killed immediately. So I had to give her a TMR that has an AoE buff. That way she is going to stay back on her first turn and use that TMR ability instead. And yes, I could have put Shadowlynx in the Samurai sub-job so that she has access to Illusion. It would have been another option, but in our team, we're running Shadowlynx as a Dragoon because Dragoon has harder hitting moves than Samurai. Yeah, so that's it. Hopefully you guys found it interesting. It's a very hard subject to tackle because the good team will really vary depending on what you're fighting and what are their weaknesses, what are their attack types and all that. So it's really a question of studying the characters and then learning the options that you have against them. But ideally, you want some synergy between your characters, and then you can take the win somehow. If I didn't completely answer your questions, please don't hesitate to ask. It's a pleasure for me to read your questions, and then I'll do my best to answer whatever your queries are. So that's it. Please like and subscribe if you learned some things and want to see more of my videos. And then thank you so much for watching, and have a great rest of your day.